So in this note sheet, we're going to be looking at the slope and y-intercept, dealing with graphs and equations. So we're going to be looking at how to find the slope of a line, how to identify an equation from a graph, and also how to pick out a graph from an equation. So let's start. What is slope? So slope tells us how steep a line graph is. So if you think about like a hill, right? You might have one hill that's really steep, like almost all the way up vertical. But then you might have another hill that's not as steep. It's kind of flat. That's what slope is. Slope tells us if our line is really steep or not that steep. It's represented by the letter M, and this is what I mean by that. So slope-intercept form is the form that we use to write these linear equations. And that looks like this. Y equals mx plus b. And so what that means is y and x will always stay letters, but m will be a number and b will also be a number. So if we're looking over here, I'm going to rewrite our slope-intercept form. The number that's glued to x is our slope. Some of you might remember that the letter m is a coefficient. That means glued to the letter x, and that's our slope. So there's three types of slope that you need to know: positive, negative, and zero. A positive slope is going to be a line that heads towards that right top side. So if I look, I can draw a line that looks like that. This would be an example of a positive slope.
Pardon this interruption, students and teachers. At this time, we'd like to invite all of our rising 9th grade students who are going to Hayfield Secondary School to make their way down to the library. You can bring any and all materials you have with you in class down to the library with you. Students should have received a pass from Ms. Pilati, and classroom teachers should have received notification of students being invited down to this event should students have lost their pass. Once again, rising 9th grade students going to Hayfield Secondary School, please at this time make your way down to the library.
Sorry about that. Anyway, like I was saying, this would be an example of a line that has a positive slope. If you go from the left to the right, it's going up. It's heading up towards this top right side. A negative slope is going to go the opposite way. So a negative slope is going to head towards the top left side. This is top right. Sorry if I was saying left. So a negative slope could be something like this. If you look at this line, when you read it from left to right, it's headed downwards. So this is a positive slope. This is a negative slope. It's going to be really important that you can tell the difference later on in this unit. So maybe you make yourself some flashcards, or you just kind of go home and study this so that you can tell the difference between positive and negative like that, okay, really quickly. So this is a positive slope. This is a negative slope. A slope of 0 is a nice, flat, horizontal line, just like that. So these are the three slopes that you have to know for this unit: positive, negative, and 0. Okay, a slope of 0 could be up here, could be down here. As long as it's a flat, horizontal line, it has a slope of 0. So how do we actually calculate the slope of a line? When we do these, slope is written as a fraction. You'll hear the term rise over run. What that means is it's the number of spaces up or down over the number of spaces right or left that you would have to travel between 2 points. So you could think of it as the top of your fraction is how many up, the bottom of your fraction is how many over. So when we're finding the slope of a line, we're going to count the number of spaces up and over you would need to go to get from one point to the other. For example, if we look at this first graph, the 2 points are picked for us really nicely. They picked one right here, and they picked one right there. Sometimes the points won't be picked for you on the graph, and you'll have to find 2 nice points on the line. So let's count. If I was to go from this point to this point, I would have to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. That's my rise. Then I would take a turn, and I would go 1, 2, 3 spaces over. That's my run. That's how many spaces over I'd have to go. So if I go to write my slope, slope is rise over run. So my slope is 4 over 3. I can't simplify that anymore, but if you look over here, we have to watch out for positive versus negative slopes. When I look at this line and I consider what side it's heading towards, this line is headed towards this negative corner. So I just need to make sure that I put a negative sign in front of my slope. If we look at the other graph, again, the points are picked really nicely for us, here and here. If I was to go from this point to this point, I would have to go up 1 space. So that's my run. And then over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. Ooh, oops, this is my rise, sorry. Over 5 spaces, that would be my run. And so when I go, I rise 1, I go up 1, over 5, my slope would be 1 over 5. If I go and I check for positive versus negative, I know it's kind of hard to see with this one because it's really low, but if this line was to keep going, eventually it's going to reach here. Okay, or maybe you look at it and it's going up when you look at it, so you realize that it's positive, so we don't need to add anything to it. So that's how you find the slope of a line. If you're having trouble with that, there's a lot of videos online, and there's also a lot of really good online activities that can help you with finding slope, or you can come and talk to me. Excuse me. On the back, we're going to be looking at y-intercept. So the y-intercept is the point where the line touches the y-axis. If you remember from elementary school, or maybe even 7th grade, the y-axis is the one that goes to the sky, y to the sky. So the y-axis is the one that goes up and down. In our equation, it's represented by the letter B. So if we go back to that slope-intercept form, the part at the end there, that's our y-intercept. That's the number that we're going to be looking at. This can either be positive or negative. So it could either be plus b or it could be minus b, depending on whether it's positive or negative. So let's look at our 2 examples. In this first one, when I look at the y-axis and I follow that line down, I see that where the line touches it is right there. That's at positive 4. So my y-intercept, I could write plus 4 or just a normal 4. It's all about what you prefer. So why don't you look at the second graph? They didn't label the axis, but we should know that this is the y-axis. Where is our graph or our line touching that y-axis? -2. Good. And so that would be our y-intercept. I took the time to show you how to find slope and how to find y-intercept because you can use them to help you answer these types of questions. In this first example, we're going to match this equation to one of these tables. In Math 7, they had you make tables and substitution and plot points, but that sounds like a lot of work. we can use what we just learned to help us eliminate answer choices. I ask you to ask yourself 3 questions. What's the y-intercept? And about the slope. Is the slope positive or negative? What is the slope? So let's look at this equation. If we remember y equals mx plus b, and we look at this equation, what's the y-intercept? What's the b part? It's -2. It's this part right here at the end. Now if we look at the slope, our slope is positive, and it's a +2. If you don't feel comfortable with seeing 2 and thinking about slope and how I told you that slope was a fraction, whenever we deal with whole number slopes, it just means that the slope is 2/1. That's how you can write a whole number as a fraction. So let's use this information to help us. Let's look at these graphs. If I look at this first graph and I look for where it's touching the y-axis, oh, here at -2. That's what we want. If I look at this graph, oh, it's touching the y-axis at +1. Is that what we decided for our y-intercept? No. So we can eliminate that answer choice. If I look at this third graph and I look down the y-axis, oh, it's touching it at +2. We said our y-intercept was -2. That means that graph is not our answer. So let's look at this last one. Oh, it's touching it here at -1. Again, we have to ask ourselves, -1, well, we said it's supposed to be -2. That's not right. But maybe we also looked and saw, wait a second, my slope is supposed to be positive. This slope is negative. That's not what I want. So that answer is gone, which means the only one who survived our test was the first one. So we were able to use the y-intercept to help us eliminate every other answer choice so that we could get the right answer. I'm telling you, it can be that easy. Just using the y-intercept. It's your best friend. It can help you out with so many things. Use it to your advantage. All right, one last question. How can we match a graph to an equation? So here we have a graph and we have 4 equations as possible answer choices. But the questions we need to ask, the questions we need to ask ourselves are exactly the same. What is the y-intercept? Well, let's look. Oh, it's right here at 4. So my y-intercept is +4. Now maybe we take a look at those equations. When I look at those equations, I see -4, +4, +4, +4. Well, wait a second. We just said our y-intercept was +4. That means option A is gone. Just like that, we've eliminated one answer choice. So let's ask ourselves some other questions. Slope. Is our slope positive or is it negative? If you said negative, you're correct. I know it might be kind of hard to see, but this line would keep continuing just like that, and eventually it's going to hit the top left corner. Okay, or maybe you see, oh wait, that's going down. Whichever way it helps you to think about it, but our slope is negative. So if we go and look at our answer choices, I see a positive 1/4, negative 1/4, -4. Well, we just said our slope has to be negative, so goodbye option C. Had a positive slope. And so now what we need to do is we need to look at the difference between a slope of 1/4 and a slope of 4, or in this case, -1/4 and -4. A slope of 1/4 would mean you would go 1 up and 4 over. A slope of 4 would mean 4 over 1, which is the opposite. You would go 4 up, 1 over. So what we need to figure out is what slope matches our graph. So let's find another point on our line. We have one point right here. Let's follow this line until we find a nice point. Oh, I see one right here. So let's think. If I go up 1 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd end up right there. Well, that's not on our line. So that's no good. So this 1/4, up 1 over 4, is not the right slope. But if I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then over 1, that's what I'm looking for. I went up 4 over 1. So our slope ends up being that -4. Another way you might want to think about it, the bigger the slope, the steeper the line. So 4 is really big in terms of slope. So that line's going to be really steep. Look at that. But if we had a slope of 1/4, it would be more flat. So 4 is like this. 1/4 would be more like that. And so that's another way you can think about it. If you need more help with this, again, happy to help you. You just got to come and stay after. And that's about it. That's slope and intercept from a graph and an equation.